Buongiorno. Let's talk about conjugating verbs in Italian, something that maybe doesn't get enough attention and something that I didn't think was necessary to talk about until recently when I realized, well, actually there are some complexities there, so why not have a little conversation about it? All right, so first, what do we mean by conjugating verbs? For example, in English, there are not too many verb conjugations because I say I sleep, you sleep, we sleep, they sleep. It's always sleep. The verb does not change. The only person in which the verb does change is in the third person singular where you say he or she sleeps. We add that S in English. So in English it's no big deal, but in Italian actually, it is. Because every verb person has a different ending. So you would say io dormo, tu dormi, lui dorme, noi dormiamo, and so on. So every subject has a different verb with a different ending. Now, because of these changes in the verb endings, it is obvious from the form of the verb which person I'm talking about. So I don't have to necessarily always state the subject. I can just say dormo molto, and I understand that I'm talking about io dormo. I sleep a lot. I can say perché non dormi bene? And I know that dormi refers to you, tu. Perché tu non dormi bene? Di domenica dormiamo fino alle 9. So dormiamo is the form for us, we. And so I know that it's saying on Sundays we sleep until 9. Dov'è Francesco? Where is Francesco? Dorme. So dorme, because I'm referring to Francesco, I know that I'm talking about him. If it's unclear whether it's a he or a she, I should specify that. And maybe in that case, I do want to list the pronoun and say lui dorme versus lei dorme if it's not clear. Okay. So in Italian, there are three main verb conjugations. There are some other verbs, but maybe for some other time. But these three conjugations are eari, iari, and iari, or are, ere, and ire. So what is the basic principle? You take a verb in its infinitive form, cantare, you take a look at the ending, which is are, and you drop it. And what you're left with is just cant. And then you add the person endings. And so for io, it's going to be canto. For tu, it's going to be canti. Canta, cantiamo, cantate, cantano. Okay? So this is the basic principle of how this works. Now, if you are studying Italian, if you're studying Italian in a American university, you're not likely to learn all the conjugations all in the same lesson. You're probably just going to learn the eari verb first, and then iari, and then iari. So, but I think it's good to make a comparison and to show what they all look like. So, for the comprare verb, eari verbs such as comprare, the forms are compro, compri, compra, compriamo, comprate, comprano. Notice that in the loro form, in none of the conjugations will we ever have the emphasis on the ending itself. It's always going to be before the ending, so it's comprano, prendono, aprono. Now in the iari verbs, like prendere, notice that there are similarities with the eari verbs. The first and the second and the first person plural are the same. So it's prendo, prendi. However, the third person changes and it's prende. Then noi person prendiamo is the same as eari verbs, and then the voi and loro persons also change, prendete and prendono. The iari verbs again have the same similarities with eari verbs and iari, which is io and tu and noi. They're identical in all verb conjugations. Apro, apri, apriamo. However, the third person is the same as with iari verbs, apre, and also the loro person, aprono, same as prendono. And the only difference between iari and iari verbs is the voi person because it's aprite. So if you take a look at all of this together, you will see the patterns. And always notice the patterns because they really help you learn this stuff. There are some spelling changes that happen in some regular aery verbs. By the way, you already guessed that Italian has a lot of irregular verbs, and we're not going to talk about them because they just need to be memorized. There are also patterns in those, so notice them, but we're not going to talk about them here. It would be too long of a video. So spelling changes in aery verbs. Verbs that have an I before the ending, such as studiare and then mangiare is another one. Mangiare is spelled with G-I-A-R-E. We don't pronounce the I. It only serves the purpose of softening the pronunciation of the G letter, but it's there. It's spelled there. So what is the change there? I will not double the I when in reality I should. So for example, studio is fine, but the second person, if I drop the ending, I'm left with studi, and then technically I should be adding another E. I'm not going to do that. So it's not going to be studii, it's just going to be studi. And then we have studia, and the same happens in the noi person. I'm not going to say studiiamo, but just studiamo. And then studiate and studiano is regular. Okay, so that's one spelling change. I'm not going to double the I. Now, there are some verbs in which that I is doubled, but they are a small group of verbs where the stress falls actually on that I, and so we do need to keep it, but we're not going to discuss those here. There are very, very few of those. And then the verbs that end in care, with a C before the ending. What I want to do in ARE verbs, and I'm also going to show you the second group that are similar, those end in gare. What I want to do here is I want to keep the pronunciation the same, which is the hard sound. And I'm going to manipulate the spelling so that I can keep that hard pronunciation. And I do that by adding an H. So it's gioco, giochi, gioca, giochiamo, giocate, giocano. And also pago, paghi, paga, paghiamo, pagate, pagano. I do want to keep the pronunciation hard, so I have to add an H in the tu and the noi form. Giochi, paghi, giochiamo, paghiamo. ERA verbs have less trouble, besides most of them are irregular anyway, but there is something else that happens here. The pronunciation changes because unlike the ARE verbs, ERA verbs, they will drop the ending in place and then the pronunciation will just follow the spelling. So the opposite situation of what we have in ARE verbs. And so notice the difference in pronunciation. When I drop the ending and add an O, I'm going to get the pronunciation leggo. And then it's going to be leggi, legge. By the way, the infinitive is pronounced leggere with a soft pronunciation. So that's why it's a little bit counterintuitive to pronounce it hard in some conjugations. So it's going to be leggo, but then it's going to be leggi, legge, leggiamo, leggete. Everything is normal. And then again in the loro person, the pronunciation is going to be hard, leggono. So just remember that in gere verbs, this happens. And so I'm going to have leggo and leggono, whereas all the persons in between are going to have the soft pronunciation. What happens with IRE verbs? Well, they have a group of regular IRE verbs that have like a little insert. It's isk. And so if we compare a regular IRE verb, such as dormire, it's going to be dormo, dormi, dorme, dormiamo, dormite, dormono. And then I have these other verbs that have this isk thing that happens in some persons. Notice that noi and voi are completely regular. But in the other persons, I have to insert this isk. And then, when I put the ending, that changes the pronunciation of it as well, as if it wasn't complicated enough to begin with, right? So what I have is capisco, hard pronunciation, and then capisci and capisce, which is soft. Capiamo, capite is normal. And then again I go back to the hard pronunciation, capiscono. So capisco, capisci, capisce, capiamo, capite, capiscono. There are a lot of these verbs in Italian, but at the beginning you're probably going to just learn a handful of the most commonly used ones, such as capire, finire, preferire, pulire, spedire, and suggerire. They all sound like capire. So I hope this helps. Until next time, ciao a tutti.